Now if you've watched the series so far on painting that beautiful bust from Young's Miniatures, the World War II Airborne Sergeant with the PIAT, then you'll know it's been quite a steep learning curve. I've learnt so much from doing this bust, and I hope you've really enjoyed it and you've learnt something along the way too. And painting this bust was so much fun. I was really looking forward to showing you the whole process from beginning to end. But unfortunately sometimes life gets in the way, and basically I lost nearly all the footage of the entire thing. But if you're like me, with every single piece that you paint, especially if it goes wrong, there's always something you can learn and take on to the next piece. Now looking back and painting this awesome bust, these are the 5 key things that I learned from this process that could help you to improve and level up your own projects in the future. Now I think the first thing that really kind of hit me on this one, especially when painting historical busts, is the level of research that you can do. So for example, when it comes to doing a bust, it can be very, very daunting and you don't really know where to start. But especially when it comes to historical busts, there's so much reference material out there. It basically tells you all the colours and the textures and everything you need to try and replicate onto the model. So for example, the smock or the combat jacket that he's wearing. Now during World War II they were still wearing like the khaki woolen kind of battle dresses. But what they developed was the Denison smock. And the purpose of it was to go over the top of their webbing and their battle dress and their uniform, but under their parachute straps. So therefore there's less things for the trooper to snag, either on the way in to the aircraft or arguably more inconvenient on the way out of the aircraft. Now these Denison smocks were literally kind of like canvasy kind of material, and they were literally painted on a wall, and they were painted with great big bold brush strokes with a great big paintbrush to create those camouflage patterns. And there's little details like that which can make your life so much easier, because it tells you the type of fabric it is, therefore it tells you the texture that you're trying to recreate. It tells you the style and how the camouflage pattern was created in the first place, and therefore that kind of guides how you replicate that on the model. And having that reference makes things so much easier, but it also really kind of adds a little bit of extra flavour into the model as well. Now the second thing is I learned a lot about lighting and shadow. Now with a tabletop mini, for example, then yes, you might put a general sort of light source in there, but you want to look good all the way around when it's viewed from anywhere on the table. And that's kind of how I've been painting the busts in the past, so it kind of looks good from any angle. But what I learned from this one is that to get the most out of it, you need to pick a viewing angle and then light it to be viewed from that particular point. So with this one, for example, if you view it from any other real angle, it looks a bit weird, but it reads and looks great from a certain position. Now painting faces on 1/10 scale models can be quite challenging, and I did a whole video on the process of how I painted this one. Now also, if you've been following on the community page, you'll see that off camera I tried to get a little bit clever and try to add a little bit more texture and specular highlights into the face, and it's a learning experience. I completely messed it up, so therefore I called quits on it. I had to strip it all off and start again. But doing that process of starting that again, I did exactly the same process as I did in that video, but then I learned so much from that as well. Now what I learned from that process of doing it again was 3 main things. Now this time I started with a grey primer, and I then did all the process and everything else I showed in that video. But the main thing I learned from this one was when it got to the stage of doing the lighting sketch. You know, the one with the monochromatic sketch with the oils. Now 2 main things with this one. First of all, I really punched the highlights and I really punched the shadows, and I really worked on that contrast, and that made a huge difference. Now it's a bit like the old school cinema or the old school theatre makeup. Now back in the day the lighting was rubbish, and an audience who was sitting a little way away, the face kind of went into a kind of a blur and you couldn't make out the expression or anything else in the face. So what the actors did is they developed a makeup which is very, very high strong contrast to make out the shape of the face and to kind of give that expression. Now it's exactly the same sketch here. You're really building up the contrast and to allow the face to be read at a distance. Now in the previous faces I've done, I guess I was looking at it too close, and therefore I was looking at the contrast from very, very close up. And therefore when you moved it away to a display distance, you lost all the contrast, you lost all that fine detail, you couldn't quite see it anymore. So in this one, I really punched that contrast, really punched it high, and it reads a lot better. The second thing I learned from this, especially with, I guess, just playing with oils for a little bit longer, was patience. Now with acrylics, you can move quite quickly, and especially if you are getting the swing of it, you can just kind of crack on and you can really get lost in it. Now with oils, they take a long time to dry. And this one, I really forced myself to do a layer, do a colour, and then put it down, leave it until the following evening, and then pick it back up again. Now what I found was that the oils, the colour would change ever so slightly once it dried, and then I could kind of correct it or enhance it once it's dried, and I could see what it's kind of going to be. But because I let it dry, I was able to maintain that contrast while still getting those smooth transitions in. And the other thing I found really helpful for painting this face, and it kind of goes back to the first point, is about doing the research but getting a reference photo. Now in this one, I found a photo of WWII, and he has a very similar shaped face to this particular bust, and also the position he was in this photo and the lighting was bang on what I was trying to recreate. And basically using that reference photo, I was able to kind of basically copy the light and the shadow and the little details of the skin and the eyes and everything else. It made life a lot easier. Now painting this was amazing, and I really hope you enjoyed it too. But what's your favourite thing about painting busts? Likewise, what's the thing you hate? What's the thing you find the most difficult? Let us know down in the comments. Now this is the last video in this series. Yes, I know, sad times. But do not despair, because there is loads more stuff coming up. We have loads more bits of kit to test, and we have loads more tabletop minis as well as busts and everything else to paint. So if you haven't done so already and you're getting value from this, please hit that like button and also consider subscribing as well, because we have loads of more cool stuff coming right up. And the next thing, I learnt so much about texture. Now there's two main ways you can put this onto your model. One is a physical texture, and the second is to take advantage of a painting style called trompe-l'oeil. Now trompe-l'oeil is literally French for deceive the eye, and that is a massive subject on its own, and it is fascinating. If you'd like to learn more about that, then let me know down in the comments. But what I learned from this was, so for example, I was painting in the texture on the webbing harness, and if you're looking at it up close, you can see that texture in the webbing material. But as soon as you go further away, then you lose it completely. But one thing I learned from this was to base the texture that you're painting so it's visible at an arm's length. Probably the biggest thing that I learned from this, and also the biggest tip I can give, is something that I was told by an amazing artist who was looking at one of my pieces a little while back. And the advice he gave was to the amount of detail that you would put in on a normal model. On a bust, double it. And then double it again. And having that mindset really challenges you to think, okay, how much detail can I put into this? What is the actual detail that I can see on the reference photos? And how can I recreate that? Now painting this was amazing, but there's still so much more to explore. So if you're up for that, check out this video up here.